Every country on Earth is in debt right now. The United States owes over $38 trillion, the highest figure in the country's history. The European Union is carrying around $14 trillion in debt. Japan owes nearly $9 trillion. Even oil-rich nations like Saudi Arabia or export powerhouses like Germany and China are under massive amounts of debt. So here's a paradox. If everyone is in debt, who exactly is this money owed to? What's actually happening is this. The world owes its debt to itself. But that doesn't mean everyone benefits equally. How did we get here? How did we end up with this pile of debt exceeding $315 trillion? Almost 3 times the size of the global economy. We need to go back to the beginning, centuries before the first credit card swipe or digital transfer. The idea of national debt was born not on Wall Street, but on the battlefield. In 1694, England was at war with France and running out of gold. The king turned to merchants for help. In return for a permanent stream of interest payments backed by future taxes, they financed the crown. To manage this new arrangement, the Bank of England was created. This was revolutionary. The state could now spend money it didn't yet have. In return, lenders received something priceless from the government, a promise that could be bought, sold, or traded. That was the birth of the government bond, the seed of the modern financial system. Let's fast forward 3 centuries. Debt has become the world's dominant export product. Global borrowing increases by the equivalent of $1 trillion every 100 days. Every country is a debtor, every bank is a lender. And every citizen, through taxes, savings, and pensions, is in the position of being both debtor and creditor. So who holds the other end of the rope? Let's start with America, because its debt isn't just national, it's global. About half of that $38 trillion is publicly held, meaning it is owed to investors rather than other parts of the government. Roughly 2/3 of those investors are American. Banks, pension funds, insurance companies, and the Federal Reserve itself. The remaining third, about $9 trillion, is held by foreign entities. The largest holder is Japan, around $1 trillion, followed by China, around $800 billion. So the statement the U.S. is in debt to China is true, but only for about 2% of the total debt. Mostly, America owes money to America. The Treasury issues bonds. Banks and funds buy them. The Federal Reserve often buys these bonds back, creating new dollars in the process. Americans pay taxes that fund the interest on those bonds, which then flows into American retirement accounts. It's like a cyclical mirror. The debt is real, but the creditor is mostly a reflection of the same system. And this circularity isn't unique to America. It's global. Japan lends to the U.S. through Treasury bonds. The U.S. lends to Europe via the IMF. Europe lends to developing nations through the World Bank. Developing nations, in turn, lend back to advanced economies by parking their foreign exchange reserves in Western bonds. This is a planetary game of hot potato, except the potato is made of promises. But there's a fourth layer, the markets themselves. Behind every government bond is a web of hedge funds, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and central banks managing tens of trillions in assets. They are the true arbiters of credit. They decide which nations can borrow cheaply and which will pay a premium for survival. When their confidence wavers, currencies collapse, governments fall, and economies can be restructured overnight. Democracy decides who governs. Markets decide who survives. And the modern high priest, the ultimate market maker of the system, is the central bank. Central banks don't just manage debt. They virtually manufacture it. Every time the Federal Reserve or the European Central Bank buys government bonds, new money is created in exchange. The liability on one balance sheet becomes the asset on another. Therefore, every dollar in circulation actually represents a unit of debt somewhere else. There is no such thing as debt-free money. For decades, this cycle has sustained itself through confidence. As long as investors believed that governments would pay the interest, even if never the principal, the machine kept turning. But what happens when confidence is shaken? We've seen it before. That's why, in the 21st century, debt is designed not to be repaid, but to be refinanced. Today, governments don't actually plan to pay off their debt. Not now, not in the future. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's policy itself. When we individuals take out a loan, we are expected to repay the principal. But governments operate differently. They see debt as a rolling subscription, issuing new bonds to pay off old ones. This is called refinancing. The real product becomes the interest payments, a rent charged for stability. The global economy is now dependent on this rent. Like a shark that must keep swimming to breathe, the system runs not on repayment, but on confidence. America will never zero out its $38 trillion of debt. It will refinance it forever. Japan has been restructuring its debt for decades. Its debt to GDP ratio exceeds 250%, and yet its bond yields are still near zero. Investors aren't waiting to be repaid. They're waiting to renew the deal. Why? Because for them, government debt is the safest collateral in existence. A U.S. Treasury bond is not seen as a liability, but as an asset. The cornerstone of global markets. Pension funds hold it. Banks use it as collateral. Central banks treat it as money. The system depends on governments never paying off their debt, because if they did, the world would lose its most trusted financial instrument. This is why when politicians talk about balancing the budget or paying off the national debt, they are essentially selling an illusion. The goal isn't to eliminate debt, but to make it sustainable, serviceable, and attractive enough that the system never stops believing in it. Because when belief disappears, the numbers cease to matter. Confidence collapses, interest rates skyrocket, and the economy, built entirely on forward-looking promises, grinds to a halt. This is the real secret of sovereign debt. The plan was never to pay it back. The plan is to keep the world believing it will be paid. It's a closed loop of trust, and as long as that trust holds, the numbers can expand indefinitely. However, trust is not distributed equally. The phrase "we owe it to ourselves" is only half true. Interest payments don't flow evenly through society. They flow upward, from taxpayers and workers to the institutions and investors who hold the debt. In other words, debt isn't just a transfer between countries. It's also a transfer between classes. That's why global inequality and global indebtedness rise together. The modern financial system has turned debt itself into money. Governments issue it, banks multiply it, investors trade it, and citizens become dependent on it. The line between debtor and creditor has become too blurred to recognize. Debt once represented bondage. Today, it means balance. But if that balance ever tips, if confidence breaks, the illusion ends. And we will remember what debt truly is, a promise that cannot be kept forever.